Price of Freedom Museum. I'm Harry, your curator and your host today. Come on in. This is Finland's Declaration of Independence, which was written right after a bloody civil war of 1917-1918. If you translate this document into English, you'll find that many of its articles follow the US Declaration of Independence fairly close. Price of Freedom Museum has its primary purpose of passing on information that freedom is not automatic. Continuing price must be paid for by almost every generation. Americans and its youth and others today need reawakening to get and stay prepared. The secondary purpose is to underline and foster warm friendship between our two countries. This museum tells and touches on the story of Finland's military history. Mostly its fight for independence, first from Swedish, then from Russian domination. These items that you see here are mostly from the Winter War of 1939 to 1940 and continuing war of 1941 to 1945 against the Soviet Union. Commander of the White Forces was Lieutenant General Carl Gustaf Mannerheim, born in Finland in 1867 and died in Switzerland in 1951. His body was brought back to Finland and was buried in Helsinki with nation's honors. He had a 30-year career in the Imperial Russian Army. He returned to his native Finland in mid-December 1917. 3 weeks later, Regent Svinhufvud asked him to organize a fighting force for the new Finnish government. In addition to serving as the Whites' military commander in the Civil War and later as the head of Finland's armed forces in 2 wars with Soviet Union and one against the Germans in Lapland 1944, he also was a chief of state twice. He was named Regent of or Temporary Chief of State in December 1918 when efforts to import a German prince to become a king of Finland collapsed. He succeeded Svinhufvud, who had been a regent since the end of the Civil War in mid-May. Mannerheim's term ended when Finland's first president, elected by Parliament, took office on July 26, 1919. 25 years later, the military chief became Finland's 6th president. Personally, I consider him as Finland's George Washington. During the Continuation War of 1941 to 1944, Finnish soldiers did not attack and fight continuously. They called it the stationary period of the war, so they had plenty of time to kill. Rather than kill the enemy, they turned to hobbies. My father made bare-handled knives. This was his own design with these 3 pine cones. Others made jewelry boxes out of birch bark. Other soldiers made birch bark knapsacks, called reppus in Finnish, and other soldiers again birch bark shoes. This corner here is dedicated to the memory of Larry Thorne, or in Finnish, Lauri Törni, as he was known in Finland. These are his medals from Finland, and these up here are from the U.S. Army Special Forces. This medal under the white cloth is the Mannerheim Cross, which he received for bravery in combat. Mannerheim Cross is equal to a Congressional Medal of Honor in the U.S. forces. There was a 3,000 mark bounty on his head by the Russians. This was broadcast on a Russian propaganda radio by Tiltu, woman who was a former Finn turned traitor. Luckily, nobody was able to collect. There's plenty of literature here in Finnish and in English about his exploits in Finland, deep in Russia, Germany, US, and Vietnam, where he lost his life on a very secret mission called Operation Shining Brass. His South Vietnamese helicopter crashed in bad weather and stayed hidden in the jungle for years before a Finnish US expedition found it and brought back the remains of Thorne and members of the South Vietnamese flight crew, plus items that could be identified. Finnish author and expert on Larry Thorne, Kari Kallonen, was a member of that expedition that brought back a piece of the helicopter which he donated to this museum a couple of years ago. This here is a table banner which Larry designed in Finland for his unit. Design was not authorized by the army, but nevertheless his men wore the badge proudly on their uniform sleeves. President of Finland, Mauno Koivisto, was a member of Lauri Törni's unit as a submachine gunner. These pictures are from Iranian mountains, where a U.S. intelligence plane had crashed. Many countries had sent in recovery units to find the plane without success, but Larry Thorne's Special Forces team did find it, removed all bodies and brought them back, destroyed all confidential items on the plane and blew it up. He received the U.S. Legion of Merit Medal for that work. Larry Thorne, also known as Lauri Törni, was buried in the Arlington National Cemetery with his South Vietnamese flight crew in 2002. Here's a copy of a letter that Lauri Törni wrote to a widow of one of his unit members who died in battle. This wall is called the Wall of Honor and dedicated to those volunteers that went to Finland in 1939 to help Finland. Close to 500 men were shipped to Finland, and another 1,000 were still in New York waiting for shipment when the war ended in March of 1940. This Finnish war medal collection is the largest in the world outside of Finland's borders. Joseph Stalin and Molotov called this war a small border incident to the world press. Later, former premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, who happened to be a political officer on the Finnish front during the war, wrote in his biography that Soviets lost from 600,000 to 1,000,000 men in this small border incident. There's a picture of my father there. He was in Finland at the time. He wasn't a volunteer, but I put his medals there. He was wounded in the end of January in 1939 or 1940, and story about how he got wounded there was he was under a huge pine tree in the snow with his troop. Mortar round exploded on top of the tree, and everyone else around him died. He had hundreds of small shrapnel in his back, but he was the only one to survive that explosion. They took him out of the snow and got him into the hospital, and got out of the hospital after the war in March. Then he joined the regular army. Sweden was one of many countries that came to help Finland in 1939. This is a uniform of a Swedish volunteer, one of about 8,000 who came to Finland in 1939. What the Finnish army did, they changed the Swedish buttons to Finnish army buttons, and his hat badge from yellow and blue to a Finnish white and blue. Their uniforms were better than the Finnish uniforms, much warmer and better fabric. Lots of Finns fought in their civilian clothes. White bed sheets were used as winter uniforms and were called model kajander, after Finland's defense minister, who did not believe that Soviets would ever attack. This was a Finnish armor defense. It was named after Soviet Foreign Minister A. Molotov, who had signed a secret cooperation pact with Hitler's Foreign Minister von Ribbentrop. How Europe will be divided after the war. Some countries will be in the German areas of influence and some in Stalin's or Soviet influence. Finland and all the Baltic states, half of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, etc., were given to Joseph Stalin this weapon, this model here, and like General Winter did lots of damage to Soviet armor. As you remember, Hitler did not keep his end of the bargain. He attacked Russia in summer of 1941, Operation Barbarossa. He figured that since Finns were able to stop Stalin from occupying their land, he could take Russia 1, 2, 3. How wrong he was. Among Swedes, Norwegians, and Danes, among others, that volunteered to help Finland was Estonia. In Luumäki, Finland, Infantry Regiment 200 was formed strictly from Estonians. They fought bravely around the city of Viipuri under their own officers, but were punished severely by the Soviets after the war. These rifles were standard issue to the Finnish army. Actually, it's the Finnish version of the Russian M1891 Mosin Nagant, 7.62 millimeter, which were captured in 1917-18 from the Russian army in Finland during the Russian Revolution and Finnish Civil War. Finns repaired them and added new sights and barrels to each rifle. It was this model of a rifle that Finnish sniper Simo Häyhä used during the Winter War. Open sights, it was called in Finnish pystykorva, or the Finnish Spitz dog. It was a terrific hunting dog. Little one, but very good. No telescope, he was able to make 542 confirmed Soviet kills. World record, which still stands today. He was wounded in the face a couple of days before the end of the Winter War by a Soviet sniper, but survived. Mannerheim promoted him from buck sergeant to second lieutenant right away and kept him from the front lines since there was a 3,000 mark bounty on his life. He was 92 when he passed away in 2002. He did receive a explosive round a couple of days before the end of the Winter War on his face, and they thought that he died. Only thing was that after they started to carry those bodies away, he showed signs of life, and they realized that he was still alive, so they took him to the hospital right away, and they were able to fix his face, and he lived until 2002, 92 years old. Story of the Finnish swastika, as you've seen over here in the museum on aircraft and tanks. It was during the Finnish Civil War. The aircraft was sent as a gift to the White Forces by the famous Swedish explorer Count Erik von Rosen. Before the aircraft was delivered, large blue swastikas were painted to the underside of the wings. This symbol was from Count von Rosen's personal amulet, his good luck charm. On March 18, this insignia was officially adopted as the national marking for the Finnish Air Force. The 6th of March 1923 was proclaimed Air Force Day and has remained so to this day. A friend of mine, Aimo Tervakoski, who sings in the Florida choir with me, his father actually was at this location when this photograph was taken of the first Finnish fighter craft with the swastika on the side, about 8 years before Hitler decided to use as a symbol of terror. This is Erik Pekkakangas on his horse. Erkki sang first tenor in our Florida male chorus and told me that while he was doing his compulsory military training in the Finnish Army in 1948, they were issued real live ammunition and taken to the Finnish-Soviet border in trucks and tanks. Soviet forces were there ready to strike. Stalin had changed his mind after finding out that the coup he had orchestrated for the Finnish government failed in Helsinki. There was nothing in the media or newspapers about this close call. Over the years, a number of dignitaries have visited the Price of Freedom Museum, including Admiral Juhani Kaskela, the past commander of the Finland's Defense Forces. He donated this beautiful Finnish naval emblem and plaque to the museum in 2009. This corner is dedicated to those Finnish officers and men who hid weapons and ammunition before the armistice was signed in 1945 between Finland and Soviet Union. These people, some of them were Martinen's men, came to the United States and served with honor in U.S. forces. For instance, Colonel Alpo Martinen, Lieutenant Colonel Alakulpi, both Mannerheim Cross winners, and many more. Also, you'll see some American Finns who served in the U.S. Armed Forces. These uniforms were donated to the museum. This is the type of uniform worn by Larry Thorne or Lauri Törni on his last fateful helicopter flight in Vietnam. It's called Tiger Suit. This one here was donated by Gunnar Penttinen, who is a Korean veteran and still active here in Finland House. The rest of this material is my personal stuff while in the Canadian Army and my 42 years as a New York Guardsman. Lottasvärd organization, or Women's Auxiliary of Finland's Home Guard. Similar to our state guard units, or in Finnish, suojeluskunta, deserve lots of credit for keeping Finland free from Soviet occupation. That was the reason why these organizations had to be disbanded in the peace treaty between Finland and the Soviet Union in 1945. Each item over here has a story of its own. So take your time and walk around and read about each item. And if you like this museum, sign our guest book that's outside there. And if you're a veteran, put in your unit and your time of service. Remember, purpose of this museum is not to glorify war, but to just remember that our parents, our grandparents, how they kept Finland free.